Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning in Indonesia. Greetings from Melbourne, Australia. So today we will start the session. There's two sessions regarding the regulations of the cyclotron production and the distributions. We have two sessions. The first session is Tony Gill from the Therapeutic Goods Administrator will speak about the how to regulations and the framework of the production and the distribution. And the second representative from Arpensa. Here connected online is the people from Indonesia, the health officials from the BPPOM. BPPOM is the FDA Indonesia, and then also from the some people from hospitals in Indonesia. So the time is yours, Tony. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. And first, can I start with just an apology from our senior hierarchy. Unfortunately, they're involved in the International Coalition Medical Regulators Authority meeting at this time. So Dr. Kay Robertson and I are from Prescription Medicines Authorisation, so the clinical evaluation part of TGA, but our presentations also include Jenny Hetson-Ongadis, who is our one of our GMP inspectors, and we'll talk also about the manufacturing principles side around nuclear medicine. So we'll start with our Kay will talk on how we regulate radiopharmaceuticals. So it's the talk is a bit broader than cyclotrons, but I mean, it's how we regulate those. So I'll pass over to Kay.
Thank you. So, thank you very much. So, radiopharmaceutical regulation in Australia is a little bit complicated. If you take nothing away from this talk apart from that, I think that's probably the summation. So radiopharmaceuticals are in general regulated as therapeutic goods, except brachytherapy, which is regulated as a medical device. So radiopharmaceuticals can be supplied as approved goods or not approved goods or exemptions. So when they're included in the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, they're approved. When they're made available through the Special Access Scheme, authorised prescriber or clinical trials, they can be provided in that kind of context as unapproved goods, but otherwise they're regulated as medicines. And they can be supplied under exemptions, and we're going to go through how that works in the next few slides. So the therapeutic goods regulations allow for exemptions to being included in the ARTG before the goods can be supplied. So this is just the parts of the Therapeutic Goods Act, which is the legislation that governs the registration and supply of medicines and medical devices in Australia. So Part 3 of the Act is about medicines, and it's divided into several parts that have importance for the regulation of radiopharmaceuticals. And those three parts are Part 3.1, which talks about standards that are applied to therapeutic goods. Part 3.2 that talks about the registration and the listing of therapeutic goods. And Part 3.3, which talks about the regulation of the manufacture of therapeutic goods. So the first part, and the part that applies to all radiopharmaceuticals, regardless of whether they're included in the ARTG or not included because they're exempt, they all must meet applicable standards. So that might include a monograph, such as the British Pharmacopoeia, the BP European Pharmacopoeia, or the United States Pharmacopoeia National Formulary. And then we have specific Australian standards that are also part of legislation that are our therapeutic goods orders, and they cover things like the presentation of a medicine, its labelling. So there are also regulations that apply, and these are the regulations that allow exemptions in certain circumstances. So Schedule 5 applies to therapeutic goods that are then exempt from operations of certain parts of Part 3.2 and Part 3.2a. So that's about registration and listing. So there's two parts of the regulations that give exemptions in certain circumstances, and we'll talk about those in a minute. And then there's two parts of the schedule that allow for the goods to be exempt from the manufacturing part. So to be exempt from listing or registration, Schedule 5 or Schedule 5A has to apply, and that could include where goods are extemporaneously compounded. And so you'd be familiar with compounding in pharmacies. Yeah. If there is dispensing of a radiopharmaceutical cold kit that's made by a pharmacist or a radiochemist, but importantly in Australia, that's the exemption applies only if it's made in a public hospital or a private hospital for use in that hospital or for another hospital in the same state or territory. So you can't make a cold kit and then send it across the country. It's got to be used within the same state or territory in which it's made. It applies for medicines or biologicals that are used in the manufacture of a therapeutic good unless they're already packaged up and presented for another therapeutic use, or they're already formulated as a dosage form. And then 5A is about the use of a radiopharmaceutical in a clinical trial, which allows clinical trial use without the need for the good to be on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods. And so you can supply without a manufacturing licence if the good is for a clinical trial, or if the manufacturer of the medicine, and the exemption also applies to devices, is made by a medical practitioner specifically for a patient, so that they're actually caring for. All the goods, except for biologicals, so that's medicines and devices, made by pharmacists, if the pharmacy is open to the public or in a private hospital, and the goods are supplied from that premises. So the pharmacist can't manufacture goods for distribution for sale across other states and territories, and they can't. They have to supply the goods from the site in which it's made. So there are no exemptions from the standards. Standards apply to all approved, unapproved and exempted from radiopharmaceuticals. There is no exemption from the standard. But with the activity of the schedule, you can be exempt from registration, or you can be exempt from manufacturing, and you can be exempt from both. So our quality team has also provided some notes. Whoops, there we are. Let's just go back on the slide. There we go. So the quality team have contributed some notes to the presentation. So these points relate to ready-for-use pharmaceuticals, such as those that are used in PET scans, non-radioactive components such as kits, chemical precursors, including those that are used for PET, and when they're used in combination with a radioactive component, so you make them together, radionuclide generators, radionuclide precursors that are used for radio labelling of other substances before they're administered. So the quality team would look at any of those goods if the sponsor was proposing to register those goods. And again, back to the standards, these are the standards that they would expect the good to meet. So they're the same as I mentioned before. There is specific guidance that we make reference to, and I think it's fine if you have copies of these, the slide that guide, provide specific guidance about the Australian perspective on the quality aspects of radiopharmaceuticals. And we also have adopted the EMA guideline on radiopharmaceuticals, and that's available from the EMA website, and that's just the link. Specific aspects that the team were quite keen that we mentioned to you are the things that they look for in a quality evaluation include the purity of the radionuclide. So, as I'm sure you know, the impurities can arise during production and decay. But it's important to establish, in most cases, the purity of the preparation and the identity of every component present and its radioactivity. And in general, the most useful method of examining the purity is by gamma and X-ray emission of particles that emit gamma and X-rays is by gamma ray spectrometry. And for alpha and beta particle emitters, then the other methods need to be employed, and those methods need to be justified, well described and justified when an application is made. So impurities can arise from the production, from the subsequent chemical procedures, from incomplete preparative separation, or from changes that happen during storage. And so you need to separate the different chemical substances contained in the preparation and determine the percentage of radioactivity of the radionuclides that you're characterising, and its activity associated with that particular chemical form. If they're multiple chemical forms, then you need to characterise all of them. So that's the end of the quality part and just the general kind of introduction. So do we want to then perhaps we might hand over to Jenny from GMP and see how we go with Jenny speaking from here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jenny, do you want to speak?
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Excellent.
I can put it a bit louder from my end.
Yep, louder this end. Have you got loud your end as well, Jenny?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
So we're on the slide.
I'm not yelling.
We're on your starter slide, so tell us when to move, which slide.
So, hello everyone. I'm not sure how many people are in the room. My name is Jenny Hanson-Nicholas. I am an inspector, but I'm also the director of the inspection section, so I manage the team. The team are 25 inspectors at the moment. Next slide. So in terms of regulation, Kay touched on this at the beginning of her presentation. The radiopharmaceuticals are regulated as therapeutic goods unless exempt. They're regulated as medicines and or APIs in clinical trials, but essentially they are medicines. And they meet, when we look at them, From a GMP perspective, with the manufacturing, they need to meet the requirements of the manufacturing standard, which is the PICS Guide to GMP for medicinal products. Next slide. So there is a specific annex in the PICS Guide to GMP on radiopharmaceuticals. It's Annex 3. You may be familiar with that. The Indonesians are part of PICS, so they are probably very familiar with that. So Annex 3 is applicable to the manufacturing procedures employed by industrial manufacturers, nuclear centres and institutes and PET centres for production and quality control of these types of products, the radiopharmaceuticals, PET radiopharmaceuticals, radioactive precursors for radiopharmaceutical production and radionuclide generators. So that's what's in the scope of Annex 3. Next slide. What I've put here is where GMP applies. So when we look at this table, you can see we've got two types of manufacture. We've got the radiopharmaceuticals, PET radiopharmaceuticals and radioactive precursors. And you can see as we move across on the first row, it says non-GMP with an asterisk. Now, the reactor and the cyclotron themselves and the production may not be subject to GMP, but whatever comes out of the reactor and the cyclotron and that transfer of material is the first step of an active substance manufacture, and it is subject to GMP. So looking at the first line again, you will see that there are various steps in manufacture. There's chemical synthesis, the purification steps, the processing, formulation and dispensing, and the aseptic or final sterilisation. They are all subject to GMP, and they're all subject to various areas of the PICS Guide. So we're not just talking about Annex 3, we're talking about Part 1 for medicines, and we're talking about Part 2, which is for APIs, and including other relevant annexes. So when we talk about relevant annexes, we're talking about Annex 1 for sterile products, and we're also talking about Annex 15 for validation. We're talking about Annex 17 for parametric release, Annex 19 for retention samples. So you can see that there are a number of areas that are applicable, and of course, Annex 13 for clinical trials. On the next row, we've got radionuclide generators. Once again, reactor cyclotron productions, they may be under non-GMP, but whatever comes out of there is the first step, and it is subject to GMP and processing as well. Next slide, please. So what I've done for the next few slides, I've written expectations from a GMP perspective for radiopharmaceuticals. They are unique in themselves with a short shelf life and batch size. In a number of cases, the batch size can be 1. And we don't do all the testing like your conventional medicines, before we release product. We look at, several tests being performed, and then the rest of the tests being performed when the material is not hot anymore. So here I've got some key points that I've put together. There are more, but I've just put some key points. Where there's no marketing authorisation and the goods are supplied under Schedule 5, for example, the product formulation must be in line with the order. So if the product there is no marketing authorisation, there needs to be an order, very similar to what we do with compounding. The actual bombardment process in the cyclotron is GMP exempt, but the handling of the hot material, the API that is removed from the cyclotron, is then subject to GMP. So this comes back to what I showed in the table before. So when personnel are involved in aseptic operations, they need to be evaluated, just like we do with other sterile medicines. And we do this by aseptic simulations and media fields. And there needs to be a program in place to include all manipulations required for the aseptic assembly and the drug product assembly as well. So that is not any different to what we do with other medicines, but the type of manufacture, it would have its own type of aseptic validation. With radiopharmaceutical products, they should not be released without the radiochemical identity and purity test being performed. So Kay spoke about those and what's involved in those types of tests as well. Next slide, please. Given the short half-life of the radiopharmaceuticals containing the radionuclides, they're usually released before all the tests have been performed. So there needs to be special attention given to the in-process controls, the critical parameters of the production process, any deviations that have come out of the process as well. There would be a preliminary check, and investigation into those. Looking at ensuring that the processes are fully validated, and the filter used in the final filtration should be tested for integrity before the final release of the product. So essentially there are various stages of release of radiopharmaceuticals. One's to supply and distribute the product. The other is when there's the human administration into the arm, if it's a sterile product, into the arm of the patient. And then we've got the final release when all the results have been received. The individual EP and BP monographs will indicate the tests that need to be done before release for supply. So tests like your sterility and your endotoxin won't be done before the final release step of the process, because they take some time. Sterility takes 14 days. So and the material should not be hot. Well, it can't be hot when you're testing this material as well. Next slide. So I touched briefly on this before. The post-use filter integrity test should be performed the next working day when the radiation levels have been decayed sufficiently to make it safe to do so. And it's not acceptable to build up all these filters over several working days. So essentially, they need to be tested as soon as possible and not built up together at a session at another time. Visual inspections are also performed for parenteral products. That is typical for parenteral products. But in this case, with these types of products, the focus is on external contamination and gross defects, which may be supported by post-decay examination as well. So sterility testing should happen as soon as when the radiation levels have decayed. And once again, preferably the next working day, unless it's justified and documented why it's taking some time to do. Endotoxin testing is very similar as well. That should be done as soon as possible as well. And if there's any delay in doing that, it needs to be justified and documented also. Next slide. So if there are synthesis kits supplied directly from a supplier in the supplier's sealed containers and supplied with a C of A, they're exempt from sampling and ID testing. The supplier needs to be an approved supplier. So the manufacturer needs to ensure that they've approved the supplier, they've done their due diligence for that as well. So with mediafilms or aseptic validation, if the media is not available, it's not in the appropriate container, water for injection or saline for injection can be used as a suitable alternative for these mediafilms. And each vial is tested for sterility using a validated method for that test. Now, testing and release of a batch of, say, 18F-FDG injection should be performed by a separate individual from the person who manufactured the batch. It's acknowledged that it's not always possible due to probably the small workforce in these areas performing manufacture of radiopharmaceuticals, but it is acceptable to have an independent person who's trained and qualified to review the test results and release the batch as soon as possible. Okay, so there's some of the nuances with radiopharmaceuticals. There are more, and we do have guidance as well that's published on the TGA website. I'm happy to share that with you if you would like after this meeting. Next slide. I've just put a couple of slides to show that, radiopharmaceutical products do go through our normal processes. So our inspection process is in a few steps. I've put some steps here at a high level. So essentially we get in Australia, so I'm talking about in Australia, we get a license application submitted. The application is assessed, and we determine what resources and duration are required to perform the inspection of a radiopharmaceutical company. And we do this. These are very similar. These are the same steps that we do for all our domestic products anyway, manufacturers, sorry. We look at determining when readiness for inspection is confirmed. That's quite important. We do want to ensure that the manufacturer is ready for an inspection before we come out. So we work with them to determine the best time to come out. The inspection is performed. Once the inspection is performed, we put, if there are deficiencies, we put deficiencies together, and we classify them according to critical, major, and other classifications. We issue that post-inspection letter, we call it a PIL. Responses are provided, we assess those. We can go back and forth a few times to ensure that we're able to close out the inspection. We issue an inspection report, or the final report at the end, which contains how we assess the facility, what we've seen at the facility, and also the deficiencies, and a little preamble at the end about how the closeout went with that as well. And then we issue a license as well to the manufacturer if it's an initial. These steps are applicable for re-inspection, except that we don't have to put in a license application, and because it's already in our system and we don't have to grant a license at the end. But essentially the rest is the same. Next slide. I put this together. Once again, it's on the public TGA website. It does talk about product risk. It talks about, what products are high risk, medium, and low risk. And radiopharmaceuticals are also part of this risk profile as well that we have. And you can see that sterile medicines are considered high risk, and APIs used for sterile preparations are in risk here. So we do look at this risk, product risk, when we look at assessment of the manufacturer, looking at the next re-inspection and when the next inspection is due. The next slide, please. So here I've got, once again, from the TGA website, from the public domain, information on manufacturers that are high risk, medium, and low. You can see from here that, if a manufacturer, so A1, A2, A3, I'll explain those. If you're an A1 manufacturer, that means you've got no critical deficiencies, no major deficiencies, and you've got a number of other deficiencies. If you're an A2 manufacturer, they're all acceptable. So A means acceptable. A2, that means that there's at least one major deficiency up to 5 major deficiencies, no critical, and potentially some other deficiencies. If it's an A3 manufacturer, there's no critical deficiency, but there are between 6 and 10 major deficiencies, and there could be some other deficiencies. So what we do is, if you're a high-risk manufacturer of a sterile radiopharmaceutical, for instance, and your outcome from the inspection was A1, we would come back in 24 months. If you're an A2 manufacturer, come back in 18 months. And if you're an A3 manufacturer, we would come back in 12 months. If a manufacturer was unacceptable, we would look at an action plan on how to bring them back into compliance. And it's not included here because it's case by case. Next slide. I've got one more. Common deficiencies. These are the common deficiencies that we find from manufacturers, and that includes radiopharmaceutical products as well. For domestic inspections, we've got two types of inspections. We do remote inspections, and that came about during COVID, and we are still using remote and also hybrid, a combination of remote and on-site inspections. These are the common deficiencies we're finding. Poor investigations, validation, documentation and data integrity issues as common things that we're seeing for remote inspections, and very similar for on-site, poor investigations, validation and data integrity. And I think that's it from me.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. That might be a point to stop and to make ourselves available for questions. If we are unable to answer your questions, we can take away the question and find an expert within the organisation who can answer that for you.
Okay, thank you. Can you stop sharing the screen, please? And for the explanation, I think it's quite clear, the framework. I give the chance first to Ibu Rizka to give a comment or introduction opening from the officials of Indonesia. Ibu Rizka is the head of BPPOM of Indonesia. Over to you, Ibu Rizka.
Yes, thank you, Prof. Laksono and Dr. Hans. Very good morning, everyone. And I wish all of the participants in the good health. First of all, we thanks to colleagues from TGA and the government of Australia for the opportunity of our team from Indonesia to have a discussion about the regulation and preparation of radiopharmaceutical for medical. As we know, Indonesia is in progress on transforming our healthcare system, including transforming the health service for cancer patients by providing essential radiotherapy services that are safe, more available and affordable for the patient. At present, Indonesia cancer patients are having difficulties to access these therapy and diagnostic tools due to the limited service available. And to transform it, we are targeting to operationalize an additional PET scan, PET CT devices, around 25 around the Indonesia area at the period of 2024 and 2028. To support the expanding essential radiology tools, there is a need to revitalize the regulation related to the use of radiopharmaceutical to support the diagnostic of using the radiological and PET scan. The government of Indonesia takes this issue very carefully, understanding the hazard rise from inappropriate handling of a radioactive substance, but considering their beneficial role in providing accurate diagnostic and therapeutic services for cancer patients. We had put regulation on managing the risk, and we are looking to more agile regulation in providing this radiology and also radionuclear for the diagnostic. The government of Indonesia worked with multi-stakeholders, including the private sector, to build necessary supply chain of radiopharmaceutical to support the our healthcare sector in the diagnostic. So we have the very precise diagnostic using the radionuclear and with using the PET CT and SPECT CT. With Australia's good experience, we believe it will be beneficial input for Indonesia to achieve the mission transforming the healthcare system. And once again, thank you for this opportunity, and thank you to the colleague from TGA. We hope our cooperation will be continued and we can working together and on hand to build the health resilience in Indonesia and to build the better healthcare in Indonesia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ibu Rizka, for the opening and also the comment for this session. I think now is the time to have questions and answers. Before I give it to the online participants, do you have any comment from our team here? Probably from BPPOM. Yeah, Ibu, silakan.
Thank you, and I have some questions to be clarified. And the first one is, we want to clarify some information regarding the GMP for the radiopharmaceutical in the hospital. And how about the requirement for the facility? Since it's not a GMP required to be applied, then what kind of standard for the facility? I think that's the first one. And the second one, do you also import the radiopharmaceutical?
Might do the first one first. There are a number of long-acting radiopharmaceutical products are imported, and they tend to be the ones that are included in the register. So, for instance, we get iodine products, and there are other products.
Yeah, lutetium as a stable compound as 177 chloride is also in the AR2. Is registered in the AR2.
So for the imported product will be similar with the non-radiopharmaceutical. The mechanism
it's very similar.
They have also the marketing authorization.
And they would need the GMP clearances
Yeah.
as a way of dealing, because Part 3 of our Act is a license for manufacture in Australia. We require for approved product as a condition of its inclusion that it has appropriate GMP, and that's looked after as a clearances. So the first one about manufacture in hospitals. I think that's always one of the challenges when you have exemptions from the register, in that we are relying on the governance system of the hospital around it. I think a lot of them will, Jenny, you might be able to answer, but I think a lot of them would follow similar processes, but they're not actually inspected against them.
Yeah, so Tony, we've got hospitals that we have licensed because, you know, they're producing product, you know, across borders.
Yeah.
They are different. I guess GMP, we do a GMP, so there are requirements in the GMPs, again, you know, around premises and equipment. So we do look at those. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm answering the question. What was the question?
I think it's about exempt when hospitals are manufacturing and they are exempt from a manufacturing license, I think is what.
Yeah, if they are exempt, we don't look at them, but we don't look at manufacturers that are exempt, you know, from licensing and GMP. But we have looked at hospitals that are not exempt because, you know, they are looking at cross borders and things like that. So we don't really look at those ones.
I suppose a comment would be that a lot of our exemptions are created when most of the manufacture of these were being done in public hospitals, not in private hospitals. And so the governance, we're relying on the governance of the hospital, who would also be concerned about all the safety in the manufacturing, like they do if they manufacture other compounded goods within the hospital. Doesn't mean that other countries need to give people exemptions.
Yeah. So since it's not the subject of inspection of TGA, right?
If they are exempt from those parts of the Act, so that's that Schedule 7 and Schedule 8 exemption, but a number of facilities might have a license but are supplying unapproved goods through the other mechanisms, through the Schedule 5 and 5A. So they can still have they might, in a lot of cases, will have a licence to be able to do that. Just the product will not have been, no one will apply for market authorisation for those products.
So to make it better clarified, is it under the Department of Health, maybe? Or
It's under probably our state, a mixture of that. Well, other areas will probably be covered by the next speaker around our PANSA and the safety. The rest would be under the states, and they do some, my understanding is there is some registration of facilities that can do things under state legislation, under their radiation safety side, but not necessarily, but it's relying on the hospital's governance of how they do all their healthcare and look after their therapeutic medicines.
Clear enough? The second question. The second question, please.
I think the second one you have answered the second one, I think. Yes. And the one another is about the GMP certificate. So is it radioisotope based, isn't it? Maybe for Jenny?
Yes, for Jenny. Did you hear the question?
I can't. You're a bit far. Can someone repeat that to me? Because it was a bit faint. Sorry about this. I mean, the phones are probably not the best.
So the GMP certification regarding the radiopharmaceutical is radioisotope based, isn't it? Here in Australia. And how you consider the form? For example, the sterile and the non-sterile?
For GMP certification, how do we determine the dosage forms?
For the radiopharmaceutical, is it radioisotope based?
I can't hear that. I didn't hear the last bit. Sorry.
So, Jenny, it's Greg Santa Maria.
Hi, Greg.
Jenny.
You're allowed.
Yeah, okay. The question is, when you license a facility, do you license based on the radioisotope or the product?
All right. Thank you. Sorry, I'm sorry. I couldn't hear before. So we do put the authorizations on the license, which talk about, the particular manufacturing steps and the dosage form. And in some cases, we make that assessment on site in terms of what the capabilities are of the manufacturer. So, an example would be, if you're able to manufacture 18F, we'll put 18F, and that's what you've demonstrated as a single type of manufacture or product type. But if you're able to demonstrate types of radioisotopes, radionucleotides, we could include that on the license as well. So it does come back to capability. It does come back to assessment, looking at how your facility is designed, what your capabilities are, and then we design, we put conditions on licenses where we have to put conditions on licenses to specify the types of products. Does that answer your question?
Yes, okay. It's clear, Jenny. Thank you. Okay.
There is one question in the chat, Jenny, regarding certification. For example, if one hospital already has GLP, is GMP still required?
Yes. If they're looking at GLP applies to testing. We can have test labs that have GLP, but they still need GMP if they're testing for therapeutic goods. So no, it doesn't replace it. You could have GLP, but we look at GMP. Yeah.
So one more question, Jenny. There's a chat here. For hospitals who produces radiopharmaceuticals, are they also mandatory to implement GMP?
I think we have covered that. We cover that, I think, in that if the product is exempt from GMP in our setting.
Okay.
The next question probably is.
Yeah, for radiopharmaceuticals production sites, is there any obligation for them to be located in special area? like the
Is there,
industrial zone.
I didn't hear the last bit.
Is there any obligation for them to be located in special area, such as the industrial zone?
Radiopharmaceutical manufacturers in a specific area? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So the zoning of the site, does that need to be specifically specifically designated as an industrial, like an industrial zone? Perhaps
The requirement.
No, probably not.
No.
I think Greg's facility is right in the heart of the city.
So we've got,
There has to be specific requirements from a safety perspective. I think that's regulated by, I think, APANZA.
it's a council, local government have regulations as to what allowable industries are allowed in certain areas.
Okay.
So in some areas you need 1,000 metres between your facility and a residential. Other states have 20 metres.
Yes. So it's state-based.
It's state-based, it's not a TGA requirement.
Okay, so it's state-based.
Yeah, I didn't know that, but that's interesting. Thank you.
Oke, saya buka kesempatan dari Bio Farma itu ada yang raise hand. Silakan dari Bio Farma untuk bisa menanyakannya secara langsung. Go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Made. I hope I'm audible to you.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you. I'm from Biopharma and we are into building this radiopharmaceutical production facility. We have benchmarked to a facility in Singapore, and we saw that the environmental monitoring, especially the viable one, is not done during the process of the synthesis and also in the process of filling. Especially in the hot cell, which is probably due to the radioactivity of the substance that is being processed in the hot cell. While if we are talking about other sterile pharmaceutical product, during the process under such aseptic environment, a viable monitoring should be done during the whole process. Can you please convey your what TGA vision about this, about the environmental monitoring, especially the viable one, because it probably will be affected by the radioactivity of the substance. Should it be done during the process or maybe before the process to ensure the sterility or maybe the cleanliness of the hot cell itself? Thank you.
That's a good question. Now, if we're talking about settle plates in a grade A area, there is an expectation to have viable monitoring, and the settle plates can be exposed for 4 hours. So there is an expectation to have viable monitoring, but it would be up to the manufacturer to justify their type of manufacture, and bearing in mind there's also the safety considerations as well as ensuring that the environment meets those cleanliness requirements, for a grade A area as well.
Okay. Made, is it clear now?
Okay, so basically it's up to the manufacturer to make the justification on their doing or not doing the viable monitoring.
Oh, yeah, they'll have to have a good reason not to do it.
Okay.
We would hear them out, but we do expect that environment to be monitored with environmental monitoring, and there would have to be a justification as to their regime and how they're going to do that as well.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we have one more question. You have one more question, online or offline here? Yeah, go ahead.
So could you share the pharmacovigilance trends regarding the radiopharmaceutical?
There is the pharmacovigilance is it's very similar to the pharmacovigilance requirements for any medicinal products that's supplied in Australia. So for goods that are registered, it is the responsibility of the sponsor to collect adverse events, to report adverse events in a timely manner to the TGA, and to maintain the safety information and product information. It's a little more complicated for goods that are exempt, but institutions where they're manufactured have their own safety reporting requirements. So the makers of the goods in those exempt circumstances need to report to usually the public. It's the public or the private hospitals that have their safety committees where there would need to be reporting of adverse events.
I think one of the things that does occur is recalls, sometimes of radiopharmaceuticals, and you can see those on our website. The sort of things they normally might be is that the amount of nucleotide is less than what they believe. After they've done the ongoing testing, they find out there's a problem because of the speed, obviously, of short-acting one to get it distributed. They then find out, and it's not uncommon to have a recall for those reasons. When the company has done its quality check, the manufacturer, quality check is something of, we have a problem, please don't use, and do those. That's probably don't get, not aware too much of how much reports of adverse events, but I think we certainly do get those sorts of things occurring.
Is there any confirmed case regarding the sterility?
Don't look at the recalls to do it. Not because we don't get involved in the recall part. But but our recalls do get published, so you can in fact look on our website under our recall database, and you can maybe have a look and see which radiopharmaceuticals have recalls and what are the sort of things that are the background to that.
Okay. Prof. Laksono, you have something to add or comment for this session with PJ?
Okay, I think this is very important issue that we have to be very careful about Indonesian's context. Including when we look at to the issue of if we have very tight regulation and very strict GMP, then I think we don't have any chance to implement in Indonesia this thing there. So I heard that in some hospitals here, GMP is not needed. Yes, is that right?
That's right.
Yeah, but in Indonesia we have regulation for GMP for every site in Bukit Hospital. This is the problem that we have to sort out after we get the home.
Yes. No, I think there is a challenge. We also see it as a challenge even in Australia. As you get a far more growing with nuclear medicine across the board, to whether all these exemptions are still fit for purpose down the track.
Yeah, and we saw it at the BPPOM site. One is CMP based, one is not. Side by side.
Yes.
Is that
That could certainly be a possibility.
That certainly is possible.
Yeah, that's in my.
I think you probably could say that they've got one site which is licensed, the other side probably would apply if they needed it. So they're probably using the same quality and all systems.
And of course, standard applied with others.
Yeah. I think we have to report into this this thing because it is very important issue for us. Because some of the hospitals they have already cyclotron, but how if they produce to another or distribute to other hospitals or sites, maybe they have to have like GMP. It is used only for the hospital. They don't need GMP.
That's obviously a decision to make.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe after this, maybe we will let you speak on this issue. business Untitled Chapter. Thank you very much anyhow.
Okay. Thank you for from GA. I think we're running out of time. We have another session. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Hope we can have a fruitful and insightful experience from you. You have more than 30 years operating the PET CT and radiopharmaceutical, so we learned a lot about you. Thank you so much, dear.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenny.
We're certainly very happy for BPPOM to come to us, and I know there's a lot of interaction with BPPOM at the moment in other fields. So, any questions, please be free to send them through.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thanks everyone.
Yeah. We go to the another session from Arpensa. So, going to me. So we will break for 2 minutes. Participant in the online, we will be back in 2 minutes to preparing the media.